The topic of this paper is structural patterns in architecture. Structure, the manner in which the parts of the whole are arranged. This definition shows that structure is a principle to be followed, in this sense through patterns that define architectural expression. If we define pattern as a man-made medium which has the ability to translate concepts of nature into ones which are applicable in architecture due to their simplicity, then site-specific patterns are methodological medium to achieve structural design that has strong cultural expression. In this paper, pattern is considered a set of rules used in architecture for design or for the analysis of existing objects. The first part of this paper discusses the terms pattern and module in relation to the case studies that follow. Patterns are primarily visual patterns that have been taken from nature. They present natural phenomena with a rhythmic pattern. Consistent rules for forming patterns seem to be predictable, so each pattern has a mathematical function by which it is formed. Harmonious patterns are specific type of patterns whose elements stand in certain spatial relationships that resulted from the proportion. These patterns have no two identical elements within themselves, but all the elements of the whole are similar, while the differences are reflected in the proportion of its parts. On the other hand, modular patterns have emerged from a series of repetitions of a module, its multiplication, rotation, translation, mathematical tessellations. Module is a combination of elements, like a triangle, that is constant and repetitive, meaning that it won't change its shape within the structure. If a polygon is used as the basic element of structure in parametric design, it can change its shape, angles, and scale, for example, based on the disposition of stress in the design structure. In structural design, it means that as the final product, the structure can be comprised of identical members or self-similar. Modular patterns are often used so the whole structure can be easily prefabricated and built or assembled. Two types of modular patterns can be noticed, ones that have strong cultural connotation and others that become universal. With the advance in technology, some patterns have become frequently used in architectural practice today. Those are usually orthogonal grids. However, to achieve site-specific structure, we should try to use local patterns. The first case study is the reciprocal frame structure of Rokoshidara Observatory. The inspiration for the project was the mountain Roko itself and the characteristic ice crystals that form on trees during winter. This resulted in different densities of the structure, which was constructed using primary metal structure bars, 1 to 2 meters long, and secondary structure made of smaller round wooden elements. The main module used in Roko Observatory is a hexagonal grid of reciprocal frame structure that was applied to the Voronoi mesh generated based on the stresses in the structure. The optimization was repeated until the final product was aesthetically satisfactory. The second case study presents GC Prosta Museum Research Center. The structure is made of short timber beams with joints inspired by the traditional Japanese toy called chidori. The toy is made of wooden sticks with differently cut endings, which, when assembled, do not require additional connecting elements since they carry each other. This principle was applied to the structure, forming cubic modules of 50 centimeters from rods 2 and 4 meters long, with cross-section 60 by 60 millimeters. The architects blurred the line between construction and skin. This can be seen in the structure of this object, which is at the same time its architecture, its skin, its form. When it comes to textile as fine and applied art, the warp and weft itself, depending on the thickness, can only achieve certain angles during the waving of the composition, and that is the way that pattern is created. In this way, it is clearly noticeable that when it comes to pierrot carpets, the geometry of the pattern used and the angles from which the patterns were constructed developed from the fiber thickness ratio. Because of these characteristics, we can assume that patterns made with the technique of waving pierrot carpets are a way of designing local architecture, especially if used as a structure that was supposed to remain visible. The proposed intervention represents a potential structure made of Petrovic pattern as an inspiration. The proposed structure that is the most flexible in order to be applicable to any pattern is reciprocal frame structure. Spans of primary rods should be around 4 meters so that one module can be used for area of around 16 square meters, which is enough for outside interventions of small scale. Also, there is a possibility to replicate modules in order to cover a larger area. Central part of each module in Petrovic pattern usually is a different color, so there is a possibility to change the density of structural elements in that part of the structure. If we assume that the pattern is a symbolic description of the culture from which it emerged, then using specific patterns can be a way of forming site-specific architecture. The GC Prosta Museum is made of identical elements that were easy to assemble. The pattern is simple, orthogonal, but its three-dimensionality gives a distinctive sense of space, perceived from different angles as a never-ending structure that can be explored. On the other hand, the optimized network of rods for Roko Observatory gives a lace-like impression, especially when it's covered by snow. These projects have a strong architectural expression but are site-specific in different ways. The first one is more local, while the second one gains its local character by merging with the mountain. The Petrovic pattern has emerged from the manner in which these rugs are traditionally made, while its secondary structure is inspired by the way they were colored. The translation of traditional pattern into structure can be one of the methodologies for designing site-specific patterns in architectural design.